Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're pushing, we're going to go further into the story of the spider and the fly, built upon the previous shirim of this encounter between the Shpaler Zeda, who represents the spider, which is Chachma, the Seichel, that wants to swallow up the fly, which is Rabbeinu, which is Binah, which is Dimyon. But ultimately, what the spider knows, but what this fly has to reveal on a practical level, is that in truth, the descent away from Chachma into the territories of Bina, into the constriction of the Yetzer Hara and the Dimyon, is ultimately the process in which the fullest light of Chachma, which is the interiority of itself, which is Keser, is going to be revealed. So the fly is going to be swallowed by the spider, but the tzimtzum, the shorish of the tzimtzum, relieves it and saves it by way of the ruach that comes to blow the page up and protect the fly. And so up until this point, what we're focusing in on is that there's the ascendancy of Malchus at Rosh Hashanah, which is the full culmination of the Birurim, which is Binah's willingness to descend down into the territories of this worldliness to clarify Chitzonius HaMalchus. And that celebration, that Suda Gedola, is ultimately going to be the Kibbutz HaGadol of Rosh Hashanah, the big skoik, the day of Yitzchak HaTzadik, the day of Yitzchak Avinu. And at first, the clear sign of how this Melech, this light of Bina, went down into the territories of Chitzonius Amalchus to rectify everything was the result of the tzimtzum of the officers who were making fun of everybody, the schok of the Adam, which is the Kabbalah of Rav Chaim Vital, which is the tzimtzum of Adam Kadmon. But then we see that the king, in order to protect the element of Bina, in order to remind us of the true purpose for the descent from Chachma into Bina, that has to be rooted in the higher level of the tzimtzum, which is the tzimtzum of Mahari Sarug, which is a tzimtzum that reveals, which is the air that blows the page, and that is where Bina gains its strength to protect itself in the battle against Chachma. Because Chachma says, Bina, why are you going down? If going down is only the possibility of getting stuck. And what Bina is responding to Chachma is that, don't you see, the only way that the true potency of Chachma can be revealed is by way of me going down. And the proof of that is in the highest level of the tzimtzum, the sign that Chachma always needs to learn over and over and over again, that even when it feels that it's grasped everything, there's still infinite levels of growth. And that infinite nature of growth and the revelation that what we thought was perfection of Chachma is in truth the imperfection relative to a new level of perfection is only uncovered by way of Bina, which is Havana Sadavar Mitoch Davar, Medama Milsa La Milsa, and the secret of Erchen, and the secret of descending down into the lowest place. And the king is watching this. This king, the celebration of Chitzonius Amalchus, which is Mevurar Al Yedei Bina, which is the light of the Zvuv, he's watching this battle of his own experience take shape across the page. And that's where we're up to now. The king Malchus was watching all of this. He was in a state of wonder. He was bewildered. The quality of Bina is one that asks questions. Mi kayi l'sheila. That with regards to Bina, we can ask Mi bara ela. Who has created this? The posture of questioning, of seeking out a certain fullness from within a place of deficiency, which is the ultimate quest at the beginning of every question, that's a Bina orientation. Bina is shakla v'tarya, she'ela v'tshuva. By Chachma, there's a vadaus, it's certain. This king, who's the chitzonius of Malchus, which understands the value and the necessity of the descent of Bina, so he's entering in, he's seeing this fly being protected by the tzimtzum, and he sees, this is where I come to understand how tzimtzum can always protect Bina. And so he places himself into the mindset of Bina. He begins to put himself into question. He begins to be bewildered, to dislodge himself from his certainty. Vehavin she'ein zed davarek. And he came to understand, which is a lashon of Bina, that this is not an empty thing. This battle between the spider and the fly is not an empty thing. Rak shemarin lo is a davar, but rather something is being shown to him. So over here, davar reik is Rosh Tevos Daled Reish. So when the king sees that the fly is being protected, that Dimyon is being protected, that Bina is being protected, that the Yetzer Hara, which is compared to a fly, is being protected to highlight the necessity of descent down, the king is gazing at this. He's put into question as a result of this. He enters into the modality of Bina, and so he comes to see that it's not a davar reik. Davar reik is Rosh Tevos Daled Reish. Dalet and Reish are fundamentally significant because when Moshe Rabbeinu is on Har Sinai and Klal Yisrael fall into the Egel HaZahav, they fall into that mistaken perspective of Bina. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Lech reid megad lusecha, go down from your greatness. And the Heilige Gaon writes that Lech Reid Megadlusecha means the Reish and the Dalid, the big Reish and the Dalid. Where is there a big Reish? Lo of Kel Acher. Kel Acher. When the Torah is warning us against worshiping foreign gods, the Reish of Acher is enlarged to highlight the significance of us really discerning what's what. So the warning against Avodah Zarah is the big Reish of Acher. And there's also a big Dalid of Hashem Echad, that Hashem is singular. So the big Reish points to Avodah Zarah, of El Acher, and the big Dalid points to the light of unity, which is Hashem Echad. And once Bnei Yisrael failed at the Egel, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, so clearly they missed the point between faith and heresy, and therefore there's no value for Dalid and Reish to be big anymore because they've clearly missed the point. But this Dalit and Reish, the Kotz V'Dardar, the uncovering of this battle between the Dalit and the Reish, that we're always going to be battling, to clarify whether we're holding by the Reish of El Acher, God forbid, of getting stuck in Avodah Zarah, or the Dalit of Kel Echad, of Hashem Echad, which is the light of unity. The Gemara talks about Rabbi Yishmael, who was a sofer, and he says, B'ni, the Tana says, B'ni hizayir b'malachtecha, be very careful with your work, because with one slight erasure, you can destroy worlds. So, for example, if you're trying to write Hashem Echad, God is one, a fly can come along and sit on the ink, and it could take off the jutted out edge of the Dalit and transform it into an El Acher. And so we see that the zvuv, the fly, plays a fundamental role in clarifying this very delicate distinction between Dalit and Reish, between going down into Binah in a healthy way, which is going to be Magala Hashem Echad, versus getting stuck in Binah in the wrong way, which is going to get us stuck in Kel Acher. So this king, Chitzonius Amalchus, is trying to understand how he got to where he is, at the Kibbutz Adadol, rectification of Chitzonius Amalchus through Binah. He's seeing that it's not a davar reik, that this fly is being protected from the spider, and that Binah has to be protected from Chachma's desire to swallow it up. And ultimately, the purpose is so that it can go down into the realms of concealment and reveal a deeper unity. Rak Shemarin lo is a davar. They're showing me something. Amara is a lashon of Malchus. It's a dimyon, that the king is now entering in. He's now going to become this process. The tzaddik, the melech, who's sitting at the Suda, is now going to fall into a secondary stage of imagination to actually experience this battle. That Chachma wants to swallow up Bina, that the spider wants to swallow up the fly, just as wisdom wants to swallow up imagination. And Shemarun lo davar, the king is about to go through this journey, go through this process of understanding the whole vision of the value of Bina and the necessity of Bina, and all of the Yerida into the territory of Dimyon and what it's actually going to do for us. So the king is watching this process on the book, and he's very amazed. And all of the officers and all of the people in the court were looking at the king, who was surprised and taken by this book, and they, in turn, were taken by the fact that the king was taken by the book. So the king is focusing in on what's happening on the book, and the chevra around the king are focusing on the king, who's focusing on what's happening in the book. And as the king was thinking about this, v'hitchil lachshov bazeh, he began to think about this. Lachshov bazeh is Rosh Tevos leiv, because the place of Bina is in the leiv, v'halev maven. He begins to try and understand havana sadavar mitoch davar, what exactly is being shown to me. Dimoy milsa lemilsa. And he wanted to understand mazeh v'al mazeh. What is this and what is above this? Mazeh is Chachma. He sees the spider. He sees that Chachma is angry at Bina, that Chachma, Kavyachol, wants to swallow up Bina. But the fact that Bina is persisting and the fact that the fly is continuously being protected helps the king realize that there's Zeh, which is Chachma, Zeh Davar, as clarified as Chachma, and there's also Al Mazeh. There's something even above Mazeh. The Mazeh is the Koyach Ma. That's the secret of Chachma. The king sees that. But then he says the Al Mazeh, and what's above Mazeh, meaning to say that the descent of Bina obviously can't just be for the sake of a descent, but it has to be for the sake of an eventual ascent, which is going to be Keser, which is the Al Mazeh. If Mazeh is the light of Chachma, then Al Mazeh is going to be the light of Keser. We see this in Megillas Esther. And so the king decides to descend down into this dreamscape of imagination, the quality of the Yetzer Hara, the quality of Bina, the quality of Dimyon, the quality of the Zvuv, And he begins to descend down in order to figure out what exactly is the mission. How does Bina descend down from Chachma in order to reveal Keser? So he says, I'm looking at Chachma, I see the spider, but the fact that the wind is continuously protecting the Zvuv reveals to me that there's an Almazeh also. There's something bigger that can come out. And what's the bigger thing that could come out as a result of the descent of Bina away from Chachma? Well, we've already said it's Pnimius Chachma, Pnimius Ta'atik. And so this is the mission of the king, to go from Mazeh, which is the plainness of Chachma in the world of Atzilus, and then descend down to reveal the Almazeh. The Almazeh is the light of Keser, Elyon, Olav Nikra, which is above and beyond Keser, which is above and beyond Chachma, and that's the purpose of the mission. And then Nitnamnim al HaSefer. Once the king decides that he's going to go into this dreamscape in order to uncover the true potency of Bina and the purpose for its descent away from Chachma, Nitnamnim al HaSefer. He falls asleep on the book, which is the light of Bina. So we see that the king is now entering into a deeper state of this process. First, he's celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the kibbutz of Rosh Hashanah, which is the celebration of the Chitzonius of Malchus, which is Mevurar al Yidei Bina. Then he encounters the schoik of the men and the schoik of the book. And then he sees this battle between the spider and the fly. The spider, again, is Chachma that wants to swallow up the Zluv, which is Bina, because it's terrified that it's going to get stuck and lost within the selfhood and the Yeshus and the imaginative, strange territory of Bri Yitzir Asiya. But the king sees that, in truth, the Tzimtzum, the Shorish of the Tzimtzum, is protecting Bina. So there must be something to be gained as a result of the descent of Bina away from Chachma. And that's going to be the ultimate revelation of Pnimius Chachma, Pnimius Ta'atik. So once the king falls asleep, the chalam lo shahaya biyado even tov shakorim diamond. So now the king falls into a secondary layer, into the realm of Dimyon itself, meaning to say that Rabbeinu is bringing us from a wakeful space and now he's taking us one layer deeper into the imagination, not because it's just the secondary stage of the story, but based on our understanding, this is a deepening of the very thing that the entire story is all about, the territory of Bechalom Adaberbo, the territory of the Chalom, which is Echad Meshishim Benevua, the secret of the life force that perpetuates itself within the darkness of slumber, the Moichin, the Katnus itself, the descent into Eretz Yisrael, the Katnus Sheba Katnus. A Chalom, a dream, is the Roshim of Moichin the Gadlus that continue to exist within Moichin the Katnus. The king's descent into the Chalom is the first encounter with trying to understand the secret of the kibbutz of Rosh Hashanah, the dormita, the slumber that is placed upon Malchus when it's ascending upwards. The Chalom, and he falls into a dream. And we're going to see the same process going on in this dream, the same battle of the spider and the fly, which is ultimately the king versus the rest of the world. The rest of the world was Chachma, just like the spider is Chachma, and the rest of the world wanted to destroy the king, but he won many wars to reveal the light of Chitzonius and Malchus being Metukan. And then we saw that same reflection taking place with the spider and the fly. The spider is trying to swallow up the fly, but the fly perpetually persists and celebrates and experiences that freedom. And now we're seeing it on a third stage within the Chalom of the king itself, which is Bechalom Adaberbo, Biyad Hanaviyam Adama. What was in the hand of the Melech, Biyad Hanaviyam Adama, in the secret of Tmunas Hashem Yabit, in Mechias Kapayim, which is the secret of the Chaf HaDimyon, the rectification of imagination by way of the Yad, as Rabbi Nachman describes in Torah Nun Daled, and as he describes in Torah Reish Yud Beis, that the utilization of the hands, Biyad Hanaviyam Adama, is the secret of Bina's capacity to regulate the imagination so that it can ascend back upwards and refine things in a good way. But without that hand, then the Dimyon can drag us into dangerous places. So what the king is dreaming is, within the territory of Dimyon, he has his Yad, he has Biyad Hanaviyam Adama, which is the secret of Bina, which is Mezachich the Chitzonius HaMalchus, and in his hands is an Even Tov, Even, a stone, inanimate object. That is the territory of Malchus, that's the lowest place. That's the domim, that which has no life. But Even Masu Habayim Hais the Rosh Pina, that the stone that is despised, the empty letters that are despised by the builders, by all of the things that make sense, are eventually going to be ascendant and be shown to be the crowning jewel of the crown. Hais the Rosh Pina. So the king is literally dreaming the very thing that he's experiencing, which is the process of the value of Bina in its capacity to be Mavarer, the Dimyon associated with Malchus, by way of bringing it back up into the interiority of Chachma to reveal the light of Keser, to reveal the light of Nevuah. So he dreams that he has this stone in his hand. And the king was looking at the stone in his hand. He was being medame, he was daydreaming within the dream. And suddenly, an exaggerated amount of individuals began to come out of the stone. These guzmaos, the world of Dimyon, the world of Dimyon is dangerous to the territory of Chachma. Why is the world of Dimyon dangerous to the territory of Chachma? Because Dimyon is going to lead a person into guzmaot, into exaggeration, and exaggeration is one step away from sheker, and then a person can get lost in all of the circuitous and secondary routes of what it means to be in the world of Dimyon. Chachma is always worried that the Dimyon is going to get untethered, and instead of bringing us back to a higher level of bittul, we're going to get stuck within the yeshus of it all. And so the king is watching, and he sees this stone, which is the chitzonius of Malchus, and he sees the beauty of it, because it's within his dimyon, and he understands the value that's going to ascend from it. But suddenly there are exaggerations of men who are coming out of it. And these exaggerations is the claim against Binah, which says that Binah, dimyon, will lead to exaggeration. The hishlach miyado hadumit. And he threw the diamond from his hand. Hadoimit is doim yud tes. Yud tes is the secret of Chava, is the yud tes chalakim that build Keser, and the secret of the Malchus Agnuza Baradla, and it's silenced. It's silenced. Vayidom Aharon. That the Dimyon de Kedusha, when it begins to be attacked by those claims that it's going to fall into exaggeration and bring a person away from the task, so it falls into silence. V'haderach etzel hamalachim, shahatoyle al gabeim ha-portrait, the mustiyuk no shelo. Now, it's typically the way of the king, the one who's dreaming, that wherever they were sitting, behind themselves in their chair, they would have their portrait, and on top of their portrait is where they would place their crown. And these forces that were trying to destroy the king, loikchim es portrait, they would take the picture from behind him. Chatchu et rosho, they cut off the head of the picture. Ve'acher kach lotchu et hakeser v'hishluchu l'toich harefesh. Kol zeh chalamlo. What the king dreams is that he has this beautiful diamond, which is Malchus, chitzonius of Malchus, the rectification of Dimyon. And then suddenly all of these antagonistic forces come out of the Dimyon. All of these forces that want to take the dimyon and take it away from the king, to say that, no, we can't have a shaykhis to Binah and to the koyach hamedama. And what do? How do they show this? What's the claim that these men, these Anshe Chachma, which represent the Akabish, which represent all of those kings who wanted to undo the secret of Rosh Hashanah? What do? What's their claim? The claim of Chachma against Binah is that if you go down from the ayin of Chachma in the world of Atzilus into the ani and the yeshus of Binah in the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, then you're going to get stuck. And not only that, if a person goes into the territory of the ani of Binah, and they want to ascend back up to the ani va'ayin b'vasachas of Keser, very often a person is going to skip the fundamental stage of the ayin of Chachma, which is the bittul, and then when we try and go back up to Keser without bittul, what we do is we manipulate it and we drag the Keser into the mud, and it's mahapich into karis. The biggest issue is when the people who find themselves down in Binah claim that they want to go straight up to Keser without going back through Chachma. The tachlis of everything is Chachma. The descent away from Chachma is for the sake of Chachma. We go down from Chachma into Binah, then back into Chachma, upwards into Keser. The concern that within the territory of Binah, either a person is going to get stuck in the separation and the orientation of yeshus and egoisms, or a person will say, no, look at me, I can go down into yesh, and then I can go all the way up into Keser without the bittul of Chachma, without the Kabbalah sadas of the tzaddikim amitim, and the das of the Torah. And then what I do is I bring my yeshus back into the Keser, and I'm mahapech Keser into karis, as the Bris Menucha points out, and I take the crown and I throw it into the mud. That's the concern of Chachma. Chachma understands what Binah wants. Chachma understands why a tzaddik like Binah would want to go down into the territories of constriction and concealment and dimyon and malchus in order to rectify the externality of it. The concern is that you're going to miss the fundamental point of returning back into Chachma, being mevatel yourself. You're going to forget about the fundamental unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're going to get stuck in the Yeshus, and then when you go back up to Keser, then it's a pagam, and the whole thing is messed up. And so that's what this king is seeing. He's saying that behind me is this portrait, and on top of it is the Keser. And these men of Chachma that want to come and destroy Binah, destroy Dimyon, what they do is they take the portrait of the king, they cut off his head, which means they take Chachma off of the picture. They're showing that all you have is the guf, which is Binah, without the Rosh. And then when you have the guf of Binah without the Rosh, then the Keser gets dragged into the mud. So that's the exact claim that Chokhmah has against Bina, that if you're not mezachich it properly and you don't go up back into Ayin again with the fundamental bittul to reveal the pnimius of Chokhmah, which is the pnimius of Atik, then the whole thing is going to be destroyed. And so this is what he says, V'chalam lo shahaya lo even tov. He dreamt that in his hands was a beautiful diamond. And there were exaggerations. The claim against Bina were ascending from this diamond, from Chitzonius Amalchus. And there was a shvira, he let go of it. He started to doubt the capacity to descend down. And generally the way it is by kings, which he was still in his dream, Shatola al Gabayama portrait, Dmus Diyukno Shalo, the Dmus, the portrait, the al gabe a portrait, toilet keser, and on top of the portrait there's the crown. Vahu osam ha'anashim, these men of Chachma, which were coming to attack the king who was holding this diamond, which is the same as the spider that wants to attack the fly, and the nations of the world and the other kings who went to battle with this tzaddik of Rabbi Nachman. And those men that were coming out of the diamond, those men of Chachma, loikchim es portrait v'chatchu et rosho, and they cut off the head, which is v'chatchu et rosho, which is Rosh Tevos or, because the danger of Bina is riboy oros. Without the balanced menucha of Chachma, we can fall into the raging fire and passion of Bina, which is what transforms all of it into an Eish Zara, God forbid, which is what happens by Nadav and Avihu, which is the tikkun that has to be rectified. And so their claim was v'chatchu et harosh. They cut off chachma, which is Rosh Tevos or, which is riboy oros. That's the danger. That's why they're afraid of a tzaddik going down into bina. V'achar kach lakchu et hakeser, which is lakchu es hakeser, which is Rosh Tevos leah. Again, they're pointing to the fact that it's the dimyon, it's the achorayim of the chachma, it's the lamed beis and the sivos chachma, it's the descent down into bina, that place of dimyon of chaver rishona, of the place of chalomos. That's the cause of the issue. They take the keser and they throw it into the refesh. They throw it into the refesh, into the waste. They show that it's meaningless. They show that it's meaningless. When in truth, in that refesh, it's otzios shifra. Shifra is the secret of bina, and also it's the rectification from within that. But this is what the king is seeing. He's seeing the very claim against bina, which is that we're afraid that you're going to go into bina, forget about chachma, try and go straight up to keser, go into keser with your yeshus, and then the crown gets dragged into the mud. And that's why they were mevatel the even. That's the kabish that's trying to swallow the zvuv. And those men, those soldiers of Chachma, were running after him to kill him. And again, an amazing Rosh Tevos here is Vahayu Osam Ha'anashim Ratzim Elav Lahargo is or Leah. Or Leah, not the ayin, but with an aleph. We saw yesterday that there's the or Leah, which is the ayin, which is the light of bina. But over here, the king is saying the reason they want to kill me is because they're afraid that this or of Leah that's going to be revealed is going to reveal the true potency of bina. Vehirim atzmo daf min hasefer hanal. But as these men were running after him, there was a page from the book that was open in front of him that came and it protected him, just as the page came to protect the zvuv from the spider, because the king in the dream is the zvuv, which is the melech who won all of those wars and makes the Suda Gedola, which is the kibbutz hagadol, the misham of Rabbi Nachman, versus all of those other malachim and tzaddikim who are mitnaged, which is the light of the Shpaler Zayda, which is the darga of the akabish, which is the darga of these men. So it's the same battle over and over. And this daf would continuously come to protect him, the sharish of the tzimtzum, like we said, reminding us of the necessity of bina. Shahaya shochev alav, the one that he was sleeping on. Shochev alav is Rosh Tevos Shah, the Shah Nehurin that descend down from Chachma and Bina together. He understood. V'hagen lefanav v'lo yachlu la'asos lo mu'uma. And the daf would continuously protect him. V'lo, that darga of hasag b'derech shlila that we saw already, which is the lo asaper lechem ma shahayabo, that light of the kipul hamalbush, that lo da album, that secret of he'elem ha'atzmi, that I can't capture anything in the end of the day, the shorash ha'elyon of tzimtzum, which teaches us that the he'elem is the deepest gilui. And that lo protected him, protected Chachma from swallowing up Bina, just like it protected the king from these men, and it protected the fly from the spider. And it protected him. And these men left him. And then the page would come back. And then they would chase after him again, the same model of the spider and the fly, Chachma chasing Bina. And the daf came up again. And so we see that the king is now becoming aware of this process, of the attack on Bina by Chachma, and he's beginning to understand the real chashash that Chachma has, which is that if you go down into Bina, then they can cut off the head. You forget about Chachma, then you go for the Kesser, and the Kesser gets dragged into the mud, and the king is being protected by the same page. And what we're going to see is then we're going to see that the king is mamish trying to figure out so desperately what this page is. What this page is. The king was mishtokik, the koyach of bina, ma'od, the koyach of bina, which comes from the tzad hasmol, the tov ma'od, the Yetzer Hara. V'haya mishtokik ma'od, Rosh Tevos mum, the secret of being a balmum from the perspective of bina, to always remember that we're mechusar. The king wanted to understand, what is it that's protecting me? What is it that protects Bina in its descent down away from Chachma to clarify Chitzonius of Malchus and ensures that we never forget that that's the Tachlis? Which page, which behaviors, which religious orientation, which expression of self in this world, which act of spiritual worship is protecting him? Because again, in the Olam HaMalbush, in that book, the original Torah, it's the shorish of the tzimtzum. And it's that tzimtzum that's protecting him. And on each page, it's clear that there's the nimusim of every single nation. They all go back to the kimitzion teitzei Torah. Hayamityare melistakel. Hayamityare lehistakel, he was afraid to look. Again, afraid that ani bina li gvura. He was afraid to look to see what was the source of Bina's capacity to descend down into Chitzonius HaMalchus. V'hitchil litzoik chaval chaval. And he began to scream out in his dream, chaval chaval. Chaval chaval. What was the king screaming out here, B'siyata Dishmaya? The king who's Bina, who's afraid of Chachma because it's coming to swallow Bina, but he sees he's being protected by the Tzimtzum HaShorashi, and he's afraid to look at that Shorash of the Tzimtzum. He's afraid to understand the true potency of his neshama. And he begins to scream, V'hitchil litzok. Chaval, chaval. Woe to me, woe to me. Now this double language of chaval, is two mems, first and foremost, Bina and Malchus. Chaval is gematria mem. There's the mem pshuta and the mem stuma. The open mem and the closed mem both represent Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. So that's what he's screaming out. He's trying to awaken a desire for Geula mitzad, the tzad of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. Chaval, chaval. There's also in Gemara and Gittin Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis, where when there was a Caesar who was trying to cause a woman and her 7 children to convert to their false religion and to bow down to their idols, so each and every child was Moser Nefesh. Each and every child was Moser Nefesh, until it came to the mother, and she says, Chaval alecha Kesar, Chaval alecha Kesar. A doubled language of Chaval. And over there we have the mother of 7 children, which is the secret of Bina. So it could be this chaval is the chaval alecha kesar, chaval alecha kesar, the sound of bina that awakens itself when it's forgetting its purpose and chachma seems to be overtaking the whole thing. And there's also the chavalim naflu li b'neimim. Chavalim is the lashon of plural. Chavalim is the light of bina that expresses itself within chachma itself. And so the king screams chaval, 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 chaval. V'shamu kol hasharim, and outside of the dream now, all of the sarim, all of them were listening, to highlight that the process of the story and the dream is reflective of the thing that's taking place outside of the dream, which is the king with the book at the celebration, which is reflective of the spider and the fly in the king's life itself. Shamu kol hasharim shahayu yoishvim sham. Kol hasharim, all of the officers who understand that secret of Schaik, the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, the Anshe HaTzadik, Shahayu Yoshim Sham Rosh Teva Shayish, Kishitigiu Lamakom Avne Shayish Tower Altom Rimayim. Shayish is the place of Bina. Limkom Avne Shayish, Bar Yochai Bina ascends into the place of Shayish. Upne Aryeh Layish, the Aryeh is the Bechina of the Shpalizeda, the Bechina of Chachma. In the light of Bina has the ability to reveal the Pnimius of Chachma. So he says Chaval, Chaval, and all of the Sarim are hearing it. They wanted to wake him up. They wanted to wake up Malchus. Malchus descends down into a dormita. Come Rosh Hashanah, Malchus descends down into a profound dormita because for the chitzonius of Malchus to be fully rectified and to be prepared to ascend up to the highest place to draw down Moichin for a new year. So there's a dormita, there's an asira that's taking place. The gevuros are all placed within Malchus. And in that deep slumber of the Melech, in that deep slumber of chitzonius of Malchus, where it's screaming out because Chachma seems to be overtaking it, they wanted to wake him. V'hayu chafetzim lahakitza, Rosh Tevas Chol, the days of Chol, the Alfei Yom in the Chol, the awakening of the Binah. They want to awaken him. They want to awaken the king. Ach ein ze nimus lahakitz et samelech. But this is not the way. This is not the way that we treat a king. Ein ze nimutz. Ein ze nimus, Rosh Tevas Ozen. It's Binah. We have to let Binah descend down. Binah has to be mashpia to Malchus. The Dimyon has to uncover the potency within itself. So they didn't want to wake up the Melech. Vayumakim sivoisav kedei lahakitzo v'lo haya shomaya. And what they were doing was they were clapping and they were banging and they were doing all sorts of things outside to wake him up, but he wasn't waking up. Because the Oros, when they are makkah each other, there's a Batisha and Chachma and Bina, and the Oros and the Kalim are all trying to spark the Hisayrus of Malchus to wake up in the secret of Ani Yeshena V'libi Er. That I descend down into the slumber of Malchus and Rosh Hashanah, and there's an awakening of Bina there, to bimamtik the dinim b'sharashim. And they couldn't wake him up externally, but in truth, velo hayashamaya, the king didn't hear, but again, we can read it as velo hayashamaya. The king who's still in the dream understands that he has to go further and further to figure out the shirish of what's giving him chayas, and it's this low. The secret of the tzimtzum, the secret of Nishmas Yisrael, the secret of Yesh Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim. The only reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps existence in a state of existence is because every time it begins to revert back to non-existence, there's something that keeps it down, which is Nishmas Yisrael. We are the tzimtzum, the Even HaShasiyah. V'lo hayashamaya, and he didn't hear yet. Tomorrow, Be'ezras Hashem, we'll go further into the dream, and we'll see what happens when the king wakes up, Be'ezras Hashem.